12. March 1947, Berlin, Bernberger Strauss. A woman in a headscarf writes in a school notebook scavenged from a bombed-out classroom, "We rebuild houses for people who have yet to arrive. No one can tell me where my husband is buried, but they tell me which wall I must carry today." Her name in the census before the war is Lieselot Brandt. She signs only LB in her diary. She writes this line in private because to say it aloud would sound like refusal. It would sound like sabotage. It would sound like ungratefulness, which, in the arithmetic of occupation and survival, can be as dangerous as open defiance. The entry sits between lists. She lists ration numbers. She lists a neighbor's missing sons. She lists a rumor about a bridge opening. She writes names of streets and the distance between piles of rubble. She counts the bricks she carries by the rhythm of her breath. The mathematics of bricks is small, exact, and relentless. 12 to a load. 6 loads to a morning. 2 mornings to a day if your back holds and you have coal. Bricks equal calories converted into walls, converted into rooms, converted into someone else's rent. Outside, the landscape is shards. The Reich's capital is an archaeology of debris. Photographs in the Allied occupation reports call it moon-like. The German word, Trümmerlandschaft, is literal, a land of rubble. Archival films show women in scarves, skirts tucked between their knees, eyes narrowed against dust, passing bricks hand to hand. They are called Trümmerfrauen. It sounds grander than it feels. It is rations for workdays and a chance to stand in a line that moves. Berlin is occupied and divided. The Soviets to the east, the Americans to the southwest, the British in the northwest. The French take a sector along the edge. Curfews are posted on street corners, 2,000 Rand hours, then 2,000 Rand hours, then loosened, then tightened again after an incident. Allied soldiers patrol. Signs announce that German police operate only with Allied consent. Fear of retribution runs under the tram lines even when the trams do not. The immediate aftermath is a mathematics of food and fire. Calorie charts in Allied medical reports estimate urban women living on 800 to 1,000 calories in the worst weeks. The hunger winter of 1946 to 47 makes the mathematics visible. Bread shrinks. Potatoes feed entire streets when a wagon overturns. Coal is currency at a level of heat. In Chaucerstrasse, a note from a magistrate's office documents arrests for Koleklau, coal theft. The file uses the word necessity in a tone that is administrative, not sympathetic. The same file records a recommendation: fewer arrests, more surveillance. By then, roofs still leak and walls still lean into streets. Snow drifts through windows without glass. One day in October 1945, LB writes, "We cleared Lehrter Bahnhof platform 3, found a child's shoe and what was inside. My neighbor says do not write that." She writes anyway. She hides the notebook inside a tin in a hollow beneath the stove. She has learned that even after capitulation, a woman writes as if someone is reading over her shoulder. She feels watched by absence more than by police. In May 1945, the city registers a few 100,000 men missing. In later months, the missing become categories. Missing in action. Prisoner of war. Dead without a body. Widows without papers that say widows. Trains roll out of the east with men who surrendered or who were taken, more roll to the east with those captured after the capitulation or picked up at random as labor. The arithmetic of missing men is a sentence of gendered labor. Women lift what bricks they can carry. Women shovel what they can move. Allied occupation orders note the release of German women from political tasks. The men will come home, it says, and take offices to build institutions. Until then, women carry walls. The dividing line between physical reconstruction and political authority is a border seldom crossed in 1945. The mathematics of power is not in the rubble fields, it sits in the offices. For July 1945, an American Civil Affairs report records the first weeks, German populace displays fear, resignation, and eagerness to conform. The phrase is boilerplate. A British military government memo from the same month points to female-led neighborhood committees that organize soup kitchens and childcare. The memo suggests that such committees be monitored to prevent the emergence of political tendencies not in accord with Allied policy. In another file, an Allied officer praises the efficiency of women's teams clearing the streets. He writes, "They achieve more in 3 hours than men in a full shift." He draws a line through this sentence and writes, "Substitute some teens." The word Trümmerfrau enters the municipal language as a job description. It is not a union category, it is a ration category. For 8 hours of labor, women receive a larger bread allowance. Reports in the Bundesarchiv from the Berlin magistrate show lists of names and hours, stamped in purple ink, tallied weekly. Many names have small cross marks. The crosses indicate injuries. The mathematics of injury in the rubble is mundane. Scratches become infections. Nails puncture feet. Bricks break wrists. A survey in an Allied intelligence medical summary estimates a sharp rise in tetanus. A German city doctor notes a spike in miscarriages among women lifting rubble. He writes the observation in a margin. He does not publish it. Lieselotte's husband, Hans, was a clerk in a freight office. He went missing in January 1945 with a Volkssturm unit near Kustrin. The unit exists in the files only as a number. The Volkssturm oath is archived in crisp typescript. There is no official record of Hans's death. In 1947, the city gives Lieselotte a letter. It says, "The magistrate acknowledges the likelihood that your husband is deceased." It is not a death certificate. It is a document to take to a ration office and a pension window. She keeps it folded behind her identity card. When asked, she says, "I am a wife." On forms, she writes, "widow." The grammar is an arithmetic of paper and grief. The black market is an economy with its own mathematics and ethics. Currencies devalue and invert. Reichsmarks fill pockets but buy nothing. Cigarettes become money. Brands acquire denominations. Lucky Strike buys more than home-rolled. 2 cigarettes, 1 kilo potatoes, a note in LB's diary calculates. Another entry records a barter trip to the countryside, a hamster fart. She carries scarabs of bread and an old coat to trade for eggs. She returns with bruises on her shins from a farmer's dog. She writes, "I smell like cow." On the train platform, a British patrol stops a woman carrying a sack of flour. The Allied report calls it confiscation of goods acquired unlawfully. The woman calls it flour to bake bread to feed children. The mathematics of illegality is negotiable at bayonet point and at a checkpoint when a soldier says he did not see that bag. The immediate aftermath produces a paper flood. Denazification begins with a questionnaire. The Fragebogen asks for memberships, donations, classes, workplaces. It is 30 pages in some zones, fewer in others. The Spushkaman denazification tribunals convene in schoolrooms not yet teaching. Categories are printed on posters pinned to blackboards. Hauptschuldig, major offenders, belastete offenders, minder belastet, lesser offenders, Mitläufer followers, entlastete exonerated. The math is meant to be moral, but it becomes administrative. A woman like Lieselotte does not need to appear. She has no party membership. She has a neighbor who does. Her neighbor's husband worked in an office that moved papers from Reich ministry to factory floor. He attends a hearing. He files an affidavit stating he joined the party in 1937 for career reasons. He writes, "I never supported excesses." The Spruchkammer receives stacks of Persilschein, Persil certificates, letters of vouching named after a detergent brand. People write for each other. The Spruchkammer reads and stamps. The Allied summaries show totals. By late 1948 in the American zone, of 3.6 million cases, fewer than 1% are classified as major offenders. The largest group falls into Mitläufer. The prosecutors thin their lists. The priorities shift. The Cold War calls the tune. The mathematics of guilt is brutal in theory and pragmatic in application. Legal categories meet political needs. The men who know how to turn on the lights, how to restart a factory, how to run a train schedule, are often men whose party IDs were stamped red. Files in the Bundesarchiv labeled Wiedereinstellung, reinstatement, show signatures of former party members hired back into public service. The 131er Gesetz of 1951 reinstates civil servants pushed out after the surrender. The arithmetic is a bargain, stability first, memory later. Some go to prison, most go home, some never left their desks. Germans write their pasts into forms like they write their pasts into diaries, with omissions and emphasis. "I followed orders" appears in affidavits as a refrain. "I had no choice." The Allied censors read those lines and prepare intelligent summaries that say, "General denial of personal responsibility is widespread." Then they add, "Cooperation is improving. Public order is good. Do not overburden the system." 25 January 1946, a British occupation report from Hanover notes, "Large influx of Ostflüchtling, refugees from the East." The word expellees will solidify later. They come from East Prussia, Silesia, Pomerania, the Sudetenland. Some marched west behind retreating German lines. Some were put on trains by new authorities with Soviet officers present. Some fled ahead of assault units. They arrive in towns already in ruins. They carry bundles and children. They carry the dialects of the East. They carry documents that are valid nowhere. Municipal offices record entitlements that exist on paper. Wohnraumbewirtschaftung, housing management, begins a cruel arithmetic. 2 rooms per family of 5. 1 room per person, if a room exists. A flat on the Erster Hinterhof, second rear courtyard, receives strangers. The landlord receives a note, "You will take in 2." The families living there, also tenants, read the note like a sentence. Walls become thin lines of chalk. Kitchens divide into shifts. Beds are shared by strangers sleeping different hours. Locals and newcomers resent each other. Oral histories record a scene repeated across towns: the knock on the door, the entry, the thin suitcase on the floor. An old woman from Königsberg sits in a chair and says, "We had a piano too." The housewife says, "We do not speak about before." Both are telling truths. Both edit their memory for survival. Occupation reports note brawls over basements, over chicken coops, over whose wedding photograph belongs above the hearth. The mathematics of scarce rooms is unforgiving. One law says share. Another law says rebuild. Lieslot's building on Bernberger Straße takes in a family from Breslau named Kaczmarek. They do not like their name's Polishness in Berlin. They insist, "We are German." They bring a tin of goose fat wrapped in cloth. The tin becomes a household currency. A spoon for a favor. A spoon for a rumor from the East. Lieslot's son, who is 11 and named Walter, trades a spoon in the courtyard to a boy whose father has returned from a camp with a cough. In 1947, the goose fat needs rationing. The arithmetic of hunger requires it. LB writes recipes in her diary that are lists of what she does not have. An Allied food officer visits the block and notes, "Cooperation among women in a report that also recommends the closure of 2 illegal market stalls. Not far from the line that divides the sectors, displaced persons camps fill with those Europe displaced. Jews liberated from camps, forced laborers from Ukraine and Poland, Italians who worked in German kitchens, Frenchmen who built German roads. They live in barracks and schools behind fences. Signs in Yiddish and Polish hang at gates. Allied guards patrol. The DPs receive better rations than Germans in the first months. Allied policy calls it minimal justice. German street rumor calls it proof of betrayal. It reveals the mathematics of resentment. In Bergen-Belsen, the DP camp grows on a landscape of the crematoria's shadows. This is not news in 1945. Germans living nearby smelled it for years. After 1945, some go to the fence and look. Some look away. An Allied intelligence summary quotes a German woman, "We must not look back because we must feed our children." Another file records the complaint, "DPs have meat." These sentences are not equivalent, but they share a grammar of survival. In Landsberg, Jewish survivors stage demonstrations for emigration to Palestine, waving signs that say, "Open the gates." German townspeople watch. Few attend. Some say, "We did not know." Allied reports pass the claim, ignorance in precise detail is plausible, ignorance in outline is not. The mathematics of knowledge divides into degrees of seeing and degrees of seeing and degrees of refusing to see. Allied newsreels show films of camps to German audiences. The screens flicker, and a delegation of local dignitaries nod as if at a sermon. Some weep, some stare. Dropped in the British zone, an opinion survey finds a majority who say the films are exaggerated, a percentage that shrinks with time and with repeated screenings. An American report notes, growing awareness of crimes committed in our name is matched by growth in narratives of self-victimhood. The arithmetic expands to include bombing, hunger, expulsion. It is a mathematics of addition that sometimes operates as subtraction. 1948 brings a different value to numbers. Marshall Plan shipments arrive at ports. Industrial capital is measured in crates and schedules. A warehouse inventory in Bremen lists milk powder and machines, steel and sacks of grain. Photographs show crates stamped with American flags and the words, "For European Recovery." German newspapers print the images. German cabinets, newly filled with ministers in Bonn, measure investment and patience. The currency reform of June 1948 is a dividing line. One day, banknotes in mattresses and pockets have no value. The next, a queue forms at distribution centers. 40 Deutsche Marks per person in 2 installments. LB writes, "New money." The shop windows filled overnight. Where have these goods been? Everybody asks. The answer is the mathematics of warehousing and price signals. Goods hidden for a profit return when currency functions. The black market collapses in a week. Cigarettes drift back to being cigarettes. In a letter in an Allied file, a colonel observes, "Morale improved. Complaints now of prices." The arithmetic of complaint is constant. The variables change. What does not change for women is the power structure. Trümmerfrauen are thanked in speeches. They are cited in articles as proof of resilience. They are not appointed to many boards that decide contracts. City housing agencies hire men to measure rooms and draw lines on maps. They hire men who have experience in the office craft. They rehire men who have the right friends. The mathematics of access operates through clubs, church networks, and old-school ties. SPD women's committees hold meetings. They raise petitions. Their petitions receive thanks, and then they are filed. When elections are held, women run. Some win. The count remains lopsided because the lists, the party offices, the candidacy committees are still in the hands of men trained in the old ways and in the new language of democracy. The woman with the headscarf becomes a symbol. In 1949, a commemorative medal in Berlin depicts a woman with a brick. The inscription speaks of gratitude. In the same years, newspapers carry advertisements for domestic appliances that promise the end of heavy labor in modern kitchens. The photograph shows a smiling woman in an apron beside a gleaming stove. The woman from the Rubble does not own that stove. She rents a space where water is a line on a chart. She is told she can afford a modern kitchen if she stops buying butter on the black market. She stopped buying butter on the black market the day after the currency reform. The price of new kitchens is not her price. Karl returns from a prisoner of war camp in late 1949. He crossed the Oder in a cattle car. He worked on a farm near Pskov. He learned hard Russian words and softer ones. He wrote letters on squares of paper that never found their addressee. In 1950, he is 32. He arrives in Hamburg and then takes a train into the British zone. He finds his name on a list of those returning. He finds no one waiting on the platform because no one knew which train he would be on. He carries a small iron pot. He keeps it as a relic of a farm where he learned that cows do not care about uniforms. Karl finds work as a clerk in a rebuilt factory in the Ruhr that used to make steel plate, now reconfigured to make machine parts. The British dismantled some of its machines. They shipped them to England. They left others and then, in time, let shipments back in. The factory belongs to a man whose mittens were once on party tables, but whose hands are now scrubbed clean. Karl reads the personnel list. He recognizes names from before. He understands the mathematics of second chances. He tells himself, it is good that they can run this. He also tells himself, it is dangerous to say aloud how many of them sat in those meetings when our neighbors were taken away. The economy accelerates. The word Wirtschaftswunder attaches itself to production and consumption. It appears first as a journalist's flourish and then settles into President Adenauer's speeches. The raw numbers are undeniable. Industrial output doubles between 1948 and 1958. American capital today, German capital tomorrow. A British occupation report says, the German is industrious when the end is clear. The sentence sits uncomfortably with the past. The past does not leave. It reappears in personnel files, in street names, in school staff rooms, in judges' robes. Karl's job is to translate the mathematics of quotas into the daily work of shipping. He writes, 8001, Order 4213, 5 crates to Düsseldorf. He keeps a notebook separate from company books. He writes in the border of that notebook, the past is a ledger with no closing balance. He watches his foreman nod to a former party section leader who runs a supplier named Roma Maschinenbau. He watches a young apprentice born in 1933 who knows nothing but the fear of sirens and the smell of damp coal learn to measure tolerances to the 10th of a millimeter. He watches wage envelopes thicken and shelves fill. He watches union men argue for wage increases and for a say in management that is not granted. The Cold War narrows the path of denazification. Allied intelligence summaries chart a shift in 1947-49. Anti-communism becomes core policy. In the bizone and then the trizone, American and British authorities prioritize bringing conservative elites into the project of running the Federal Republic. Files reproduced in the Bundesarchiv show directives to speed up denazification cases, to close categories, to redirect attention to the need for order. The Soviets in the East declare themselves an anti-fascist state and prosecute trials that are also propaganda. They recruit from among the faithful and the opportunists. They build a wall of language first and a physical wall later. In 1948–49, the Berlin blockade turns logistics into politics. Airplanes bring bread and coal. Children watch candy fall from the sky in small parachutes. The arithmetic of calories becomes the arithmetic of airlift tonnage. Each sack of flour is also a leaflet. While air corridors hum, the city governments write statutes about compensation. The Lastenausgleichsgesetz of 1952 promises to equalize burdens. Destruction is quantified. A photograph of a crater metastasizes into numbers on a page. Payouts are scheduled over decades. The mathematics is a compromise shaped by a budget that must rebuild while repaying. Karl's factory pays taxes into this system. His wage slip shows deductions. He is content to pay as long as the price of sausages stays within reach. Women who lifted the bricks are still standing in queues. Many marry men who return, who are promoted, who sit in offices. Many do not marry. Widows under 40 vow to remain so. It is an oath made once, and then revised under pressure of hunger and of a state that prefers marriage into stability. The law calls some of them war widows and offers pensions. The amount is a line in a ledger. It is seldom enough to live on. It is a supplement to washing other people's clothes and rooms. The women make coal stretch by saving the ash for the new day. They learn to measure the heat in the palm of their hands. The gendered division of labor that had loosened under necessity snaps back into place under ideology and habit. The official language praises women's sacrifice and their return to private life. The press in the early 1950s runs features on the ideal of the Hausfrau. Minutes of party meetings show women delegates objecting. The minutes record their objections in parentheses. The decisions proceed. A federal agency commissions posters with the slogan, "Our homeland is the family." The posters hang in city offices where men sign contracts for roads women cleared. Schoolbooks adapt. The first generation of textbooks in the Federal Republic emphasize the medieval, the musical, the humanist, the suffering under bombs, the millions expelled, the airlift candy. They mention the camps in paragraphs and the perpetrators in passive voice. Jews were killed. Opponents were imprisoned. The grammar is the mathematics of vagueness. In the German Democratic Republic, the schoolbooks call it fascism and fascists. They name the class enemy and praise the anti-fascists. They do not list the names of the camp guards now working in the West. They do not list their own collaborators from 1933, who now own small shops, or their own police. Both Germanies build usable pasts from pieces of rubble not yet cleared. 1953, West Berlin. Lieselotte takes a bus past a new office building with a glass facade that shines like an idea. She writes, "I could clean those windows." She also writes, "Walter says we will own a car one day." She measures Walter's optimism like a ration. She lives in a room that used to be a pantry and pays a rent that rose after the currency reform and rises again with the repairs that she made with her own hands. The city says rent control is temporary. The men say rents must pay for construction. The banks say the mathematics of lending demands returns. She calculates her life between sheets and coal. In 1955, Karl buys a radio. He puts it in his living room like an altar. He listens to news about sovereignty. The Republic is sovereign now with conditions. He listens to announcements about joining the European project. He hears the word community and thinks of the Bloc War years when community was injury and help. He makes a note. The community is now an agreement to forget. He does not mean forget everything. He means that the words used in public stop before they reach names. Contact with victims continues as a perimeter condition. In 1950, the DP camps thin. Emigration flows to Israel, to the United States. Some stay. German Jews who survived return to cities where their apartments are occupied by expellees or by Nazi widows. Some get restitution under laws that move slowly. Files in the Oberfinanz direction record petitions for furniture and for paintings. My father's watch, a woman writes. A chair, a man writes. The office stamps received. The files are decades long. German newspapers cover the trials of perpetrators in the 1960s. A few German students attend. A few older Germans watch, as if from behind glass. Karl sits on a personnel committee in his factory in 1961. He sees a file of an applicant whose wartime job was camp guard and postal clerk. The guard is listed as duty. The postal clerk is listed as skill. The discussion around the table uses the word reliable. He writes in his notebook, "Our democracy rests on unspoken bargains." He watches men who were in one party become men who join another. He watches them stand and applaud Prime Minister speeches about freedom. He believes in freedom. He distrusts the applause. He attends an overtime meeting on the day the Berlin Wall goes up. He hears it on the radio. He knows instantly that the mathematics has shifted. The front line will be drawn through streets, through families, through decisions about whom to visit and when. He knows that his own front line runs through his memory and through his paperwork. It is in the way he signs forms that certify this man as acceptable and that woman as suitable for light tasks. It is in the way he chooses to say that this was the past, that is the present. 1968, Frankfurt. Students march under banners demanding that the old men leave the courts and universities. They shout the names of judges who signed death warrants in 1943 and kept their robes in 1953. Karl watches on television. He recognizes a man in a crowd who was his foreman and who retired last year with a handshake. He does not recognize the slogans anymore, not because he disagrees with their essence, but because he feels the ground beneath them is layers of deals he agreed to. He writes, "If they knew how many small forgivenesses I made, would they forgive me?" Lieselot lives in a housing estate on the edge of the city now. The buildings rise from a field where farmers once cultivated potatoes that she traded for soap. The estate is concrete and orderly. The elevator breaks. The caretaker is a man with a cap who carries a notebook of his own. She pays rent on time. She buys new curtains. She spends afternoons with a circle of other women. They talk about grandchildren. They do not talk about the afternoon in 1945 when they traded wedding rings for bread in a basement market. They do not talk about the women in the DP camp behind the school who sang in a language that sounded like lament. The women in her circle say, "We have peace." The women in her circle say, "The past is a foreign country with our house inside it." She votes. She never misses an election. She votes for parties that promise order and pensions. She is praised by politicians in speeches as the backbone of the nation. She reads in a newspaper in 1970 that the city has named a street, Trümmerfrauenweg. It is in a suburb near where the new automotive plant is. The street has no houses on it yet. She writes, "I would like to live on that street." She cannot afford it. The mathematics of credit reaches families in the 1970s. Her son Walter buys a car. He drives her out to see the street that bears a name that includes her story. She says, "We did not rebuild for this car. We rebuilt to have a roof." He laughs, embarrassed. He means well. He drives her to a lake. He buys ice cream. He cannot see in her posture the weight of bricks. She cannot see in his grin the weight of never having had to carry them. In files labeled Oral History in the Bundesarchiv, researchers record interviews with men and women from Lieselot's cohort. Some cry. Some deny. Some tell small truths as an aside after the official recorder is off. The transcriptions include ellipses, where they ask not to be recorded, saying that name. The researchers publish papers about memory and narrative. They write about the politics of commemoration that emphasize German suffering. They write about the slow emergence of the more complex arithmetic. The city organizes a ceremony for the Trümmerfrauen in 1977. Photographs show rows of elderly women in coats, holding flowers, sitting on folding chairs in sun. A man with a sash pins medals to their lapels. Speeches are made about debt and gratitude. Some women smile with pride. Some look at their shoes. One reaches up and touches the pin as if to weigh its metal content. A reporter asks, "Do you feel recognized now?" The woman says, "I am here." Karl keeps working until his knees and his patience give out. He retires in 1985 with a watch and a speech from a man whose father was a party member and then a Christian Democrat. He returns the watch for repair 2 years later because it loses minutes. He writes a final sequence of notes in a notebook with a blue cover. He titles it, without telling anyone, Die Rechnungen, the accounts. It is his private Sprüchkammer, his own tribunal of memory. In it, he lists names. He lists moments. He lists a day in 1942 when he laughed at a joke on a train about a neighbor's Jewish wife. He writes, "I said nothing." He lists a day in 1947 when he signed a denazification form for a man he knew had managed labor stolen from prisoners. He writes, "I said nothing." He lists a day in 1956 when he sat in a meeting and did not name a woman for promotion because she was a woman. He writes, "I said nothing." He lists a day in 1963 when he sent a crate of parts to a subcontractor and did not ask where the money came from. He writes, "I said nothing." He lists a day in 1979 when he told his grandson how brave they were to rebuild and did not tell him about the women who carried the bricks. He writes, "I said nothing." The arithmetic of guilt in personal form has no categories, no stamps, no Purcell sheen. It has a balance sheet that cannot be closed with a speech. Karl is not a judge. He is an ordinary man in a country that needed ordinary men to become decent after being indecent. He writes, "Our democracy rests on this, that we agreed to live with men like me." He does not absolve. He does not condemn. He counts. He returns to the line that began this story. He copies it from Lieslot's notebook, which he has because when she died, Walter brought a tin to his kitchen and said, "You will know what to do with this." Inside, the diary had pages for each year between 1945 and 1952, then scattered notes afterward. Karl reads the first entry 3 times. He writes under it, "We built factories and courts and a parliament. We signed forms that said we were new. We ate, we danced, we planted trees. We invited silence to sit at our tables because it was polite and because it was efficient. We rebuilt houses for people who had yet to arrive. And then we learned we had rebuilt a city we could not afford to live in, not with the truth we owed." He writes a line that could not have been spoken then and cannot be spoken now without cost. The front line after 1945 ran through my memory and my paperwork, and it still does, and it is the only war I know how to fight. He closes the notebook. He puts it in a drawer with his watch, which is still losing minutes, because accounting for time is as difficult as accounting for oneself. He writes a final sentence on a loose sheet for no one. No one could tell her where her husband was buried, but she could tell me which walls I still carry, and I will write them down until the figures add up, which they will not. He pins that sheet to the inside of the drawer. He pulls it shut. He hears the faint click of a lock and mistakes it for relief. He catches his reflection in the glass of a framed photograph of a building his hands never lifted. He thinks of a street with a name that contains praise and absence. He returns to the first sentence and understands that for him, And for Lieselot, the front line after 1945 ran not across a battlefield but through forms, through rations, through their own kept silences, through rubble that could not be cleared from the mind by any number of bricks passed hand to hand.